So this lecture focuses on the period following the war in which Germany is divided. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany must address and reintroduce fairy tales, eventually incorporating many of the arguments found in the anti-fairy tales of the Weimar period as the product of a new socially conscious children's literature. So the other half of Germany, East Germany, or the German Democratic Republic, quickly becomes a proxy satellite government under the Soviet Union. And East German citizens are subjected to heavy surveillance, reproducing a totalitarian style of government that eliminates and excludes dissenting views. The purported pro-socialist East Germany produces fairy tale films that exhibit a continuation of the totalitarian elements that they sought to distance themselves from, while the pro-capitalist West Germany produces fairy tales that take up those earlier failed and banned tales of the Weimar period, as well as engaging in producing their own brand of irreverent, realistic anti-fairy tales. So at the end of the war, there was a lengthy deliberation by the Allies on what to do with Germany. The Cold War was brewing, creating a scramble for viable scientists and setting the stage for coming remilitarization of the heartland of Europe. At first, programs of relocation and rebuilding were the primary objectives for those left in Germany. German refugees kept pouring in from the east, and war criminals either fled or were captured or employed by the Allies for the coming decades of espionage and ideological conflict that would play out in Europe and over a divided Germany. And it wasn't until 1949 that the French, British, and American partnership led to the recognition of West Germany as an economic bloc in the West, and a fledgling democracy with limited self-rule was installed. In response, East Germany was formed as part of the growing East European sector that would become known as the Eastern Bloc behind the Iron Curtain. In the East, the founding myth was anti-fascism. So all former Nazi party members had been chased out or prosecuted in East Germany, and now all former Communist Party members were put into positions of political power. East Germany held its first elections, but soon after the victory of the SED, a committee was formed that connected it to the true power of the Soviet Union. In the West, the Allies relied upon self-reporting, so re-education, and a simple questionnaire to weed out those deemed to be too fascist. In practice, the Allies allowed many former Nazis to remain in their positions, with only the most prominent being prosecuted or fleeing under a false identity. So this division along East-West ideological lines became more pronounced the further the resources and investment of the West outshone the East, where much of the production and means of production were moved back to help rebuild Russia. This disparity in resources and economic opportunities created a brain drain that had many talented young men leaving the East for the West, which eventually led to the anti-fascist protective shield, or the wall, to be erected in 1961. And sometimes the wall was an actual wall, like in Berlin. At other times, it was automated machine guns, barbed wire, or other deterrents spread out across the border. And as the economic problems persisted in the East, the oppressed, as well as the adventurous, attempted to escape by a variety of creative and often unsuccessful means, sometimes resulting in death or the erasure of that person from social life through imprisonment, isolation, or torture. In the East, an oppressive security force arose under the watchful eyes of the Kremlin. In Dresden, which was a semiconductor hub of East Germany, the local surveillance forces were coordinated by one Kremlin representative, Vladimir Putin. The Stasi, or state security, at one point employed up to 1 in every 8 East Germans as an informant. And there were many cases of spouses being paid to survey and inform on their prominently outspoken wives and husbands. In East Germany, a tight grip on media was a necessity, and no critique of the party was allowed, and certain issues that were not supposed to exist in a utopia, like murder, rape, suicide, etc., were censored with no research allowed on those, since these were deemed to be issues only found in capitalist societies. In the West, there were still ex-Nazis in courthouses, politics, the military, and schools and universities. And the economic miracle that was helped along by immense outside funding, and that Germany found itself to be in a central location for European trade, that set the stage for a growing prosperity that made subsequent generations more progressive and more liberal. By the late 1960s, a growing student movement led the way for some breakthrough changes at the university level, and those who were part of that generation became the teachers, doctors, and other professionals of the 1970s. So this generation rejected the authoritarian past and adopted a very pro-social, political, and educational agenda. The fairy tales were ideological artifacts that carried with them the tools that the Nazis used to produce a false consciousness and authoritarian socialization, so that there was a need to adapt, revise, and write new versions of these tales for the coming generation.